thank you guys so much for being here. This is a great panel. We're going to jump in. Let's set the stage first, and let's talk about innovation. And when you look at your companies, when you look at the market, what's exciting to you right now about some of the opportunities, and what keeps you up at night?
So, hi everyone, happy to be here. Brightest lights on the planet, just so we're crystal clear. Oh my God. So look, I'm somebody who gets pretty excited about everything in our industry. And I think, we'll probably touch on it, one of those 12 topics, in the midst of a lot of change in our industry. And that excites me, right? Because I think it's a moment in time where as individual entrepreneurs, as agents, as broker owners, as leaders, it's forcing us to think a little bit differently and to raise the bar on what we do and reset our value and the benefit in the industry to the consumer, to the buyer and seller, which is at the heart of what we do, right? And so I think that is really important, thinking about different ways to approach the business, putting that value first, resetting who we are in the space, I think is really important. I think there's a lot of interesting technology that we'll talk a little bit about as well, that is going to help all of you and all of us run our businesses more efficiently and effectively. And I think that's a really exciting time for the industry. And I think we're at a moment now where that's developing in a real way that's tangible and usable. I've been doing this 25 plus years. We've always talked about it, but it's not always been ripe for utilization the way it is now, I think. What keeps me up at night? Not much. I think I was joking with you about this at one point. Like, I sleep really well. People are surprised. It's probably just sheer exhaustion at the end of the day. But, I do worry about some of the macro things, right? I think we truly have an inventory problem in our country. We have an affordability problem. And, I don't think even a rate adjustment is going to necessarily free all of that up, which we can talk about. So those are kind of the things that I think on the macro level that, whether it's individuals as leaders in the industry, we need to lean into our voice in DC on some of those things, working with local zoning and all of that. So that's kind of what I worry about a little bit.
I'm glad you sleep well at night. That is surprising.
I do. I don't know. I think it's just, there's like a sleep sound machine involved. It takes a lot, but I do.
Leo, what about you?
So I think one of the first interviews I did when I became CEO was with you. And one of the questions you asked me is like, what's your first 100 days or 1 year plan? And if you remember, I said, getting us past the NAR settlement, right? It became kind of my obsession because, again, I try to draw parallels from past experiences. And where this is not normal evolution and change, right? Most evolutionary changes come from something that happens and then we all kind of slowly adjust. But the last time I saw this happen was CFPB, Dodd-Frank, QRM, and our counterparts in the lending industry had to have a dramatic shift from one day to the next. And we've talked about this, Sarah, where I've had less empathy from folks who are like, hey, we had our dramatic shift, and people went out of business, right? There was new ways of doing things. Serious manufacturing costs increased per unit economics, and so when there is change, and I'm less shy than my friends over here, I think the settlement was the result of ambulance-chasing attorneys who don't give a damn about our industry. Yes. And I say that because none of this is pro-consumer, right? A lot of the changes were agreed upon in some litigation, and the reason we're also confused is because none of them are practitioners. But life is 10% what happens and 90% how you choose to react to it. And the question I have for agents who, are hesitant and digging in their heels is, do you still want to help families with the most important decision of their financial lives? If the answer is yes, these are the new rules we were given. And you have to choose to move forward and find a path forward with the consumer in mind.
Always.
So whether it's what excites me or what keeps me up at night is how do we best serve consumers during this messy middle? Because what I am 100% sure of is next year when we come here and we think back through this transition, it'll seem as ridiculous as when we were wiping down our groceries during COVID because we'll just have a new way of doing things.
Yeah.
But it's the getting there from point A to point B that's tricky. And so whether that's developing documents and tools and training and scripts and dialogues and, it's a confidence game now. because every agent is now a listing agent. You have to assume going forward every appointment you're on is competitive. You have to assume you have to be able to articulate in a short period of time the value proposition, the services you're willing to render, and the fee you're willing to accept for that. And there are some systemic changes. So everything that you will experience with buyers, you've had on the listing side for years. So part of that is there is a new category of buyers. And I refer to them as FSBO buyers, because when we say unrepresented, it triggers too much, contract language. But on the seller side, there's 5 to 10% of sellers who choose to go at it alone. And the variance between 5 and 10% is almost correlated directly to number of transactions available in the market. When there's less inventory, there's more for sale by owner. When there's more inventory, there's less for sale by owner. So this is going to be new for all of us, where there's a category of buyers who choose to be unrepresented. There will be new business models that enter the space, right? Just like on the listing side. So I've been licensed for 23 years. Of 16 years I was actively practicing. I had to compete with flat fee models, menu of service models, percentage models that ranged quite a bit, with a different value proposition for a different fee structure. And so there are new ways that we will have to compete on the buy side that are new to all of us. And so you have to be nimble and agile, decide what works in your market, decide what works in that inventory environment, that price point, that specialization. And so right now for me is how do we quickly get past to the other side? How do we empower agents with as much technology, forums, and training to take care of the consumer?
I love that. Well, let's dig into the technology part a little bit, right? So how does technology help you meet this moment? How is it helping your company meet this moment, your agents meet this moment?
So I think technology, I've always had the perspective, and we at Anywhere think about it as a true enabler, right? I think that, and you talk about all the different models that we've seen over the years, and we'll continue to see, I completely agree, anytime there's a change in the industry, you're gonna see things come about, right? Whether it's a new model, new technology to help serve, et cetera. I firmly believe in the value of you all, of the agent, right? And I don't see that any technology is going to come in and replace the value that you bring to that buyer and seller in the transaction. What I do think, and what I'm seeing, and I don't know how many were in the room yesterday, there was the really cool AI presentation with the song that was created, which by the way, somebody then texted me later, their song that they already did, so quick, easy, right? It was hilarious. But there is a real ability and a need to adopt technology to help make you more efficient, right? The fact of the matter is the ROI on the utilization of technology to help you become more efficient, do more transactions, obviously, and manage your time better are crucial to your business. When you think about leveraging, whether it be generative AI to help you with your listing agreements, we have it in our, some of our tools within Listing Concierge, which is a listing and marketing platform that uses generative AI to write the first, always check it, we don't trust it entirely, right? Little public service announcement. But to see the growth in that technology is really meaningful. We also leverage technology to use our data that we have in mass to help our affiliates run their businesses differently. So how can I take all of the data that helps them look at their business in the marketplace, understand what the dynamics are, do some benchmarking and other things in a way that takes that off their plate from having to do every single day, right? Because we should be looking at technology, whether you are an agent, whether you are a business owner, to make our lives easier, to reduce cost, to make things, easier for you. We look at the side of the transaction, the contract to close process, and we do virtual close, so you can do things virtually, right? So how do we make it more efficient and integrated for the consumer in this process as well? Because it is a really fragmented process, but the more you're able to leverage that technology, we're looking at talking about buyer agreements, and you have to have buyer agreements signed. That has to be really simple, right? And we created the documents in a way that you shouldn't have to go to a lawyer to have these signed, right? To review, that's not the intent. But it also should be easy, because if you're driving by with a consumer and you want to see a house, you've got to have something signed today before you walk into that home. So how can we do that on our phone and do it digitally, mobile enabled, to make it efficient and easy, take the complexity out of the business so we can focus efforts on what we do, which is the sales process.
I echo everything she said. You know, I've watched technology accelerate the process, right? So once upon a time, I'd have to call a landline, wait for a call back. So like if a new listing came on a Monday, by the time I was able to schedule the appointment, see it, and write up an offer, the fastest I could do it in was 3 or 4 days, and send it through fax, right? There's been 2 accelerators that I've watched in my 23 years. One was high-speed internet, so I could actually access listings from my house. And the second force multiplier was mobile, because, you know, I used to drive around with maps and MapQuest printouts, which was terrifying.
Like Hagstroms, and you would like highlight your tour. That was awesome.
And now a property gets listed, it gets syndicated to all the portals, which we should probably talk about. And there's an instant, you know, ability to see something within minutes or hours of going live. The consumer can collaboratively schedule through a showing service. You guys could be at a property legitimately within an hour, and the agent can digitally create an offer and present it from a mobile device. And so what used to take 5 or 6 days can now happen in hours. And so the velocity of which stuff happens continues to increase. And if technology could have rendered us obsolete, it would have happened in the last decade. We just witnessed $50 billion try. Yep. And what a lot of them found out was the last mile is intense, it's fragmented, it's complicated, it's highly emotional, it's highly infrequent. And so most of them either went out of business or pivoted to fully partner with the practitioner. So I completely agree with Sue. I think during our functional lifetime, we will still have a very important role as a hand-holding guide. But the agents that don't adopt technology get rendered obsolete by the agents that do. And the one thing that, you know, is bad news to remind everybody is we play a finite game, right? There is only X amount of homes that sell every year. So it is a limited piece of the pie we're competing with, and the people who can do it faster, stronger, with less, win.
It's a great way to put it, and I think it really is a good segue into the next question I have, which is around consumer expectations. So you have consumer expectations, whether they're buying or selling, about the technology and about the hand-holding that you talked about. Like, what exactly do they want there? And especially with, you know, some of the turmoil, they're reading all the headlines. They're like, what does this even mean? How do I do this? What is our relationship now? So let's talk a little bit about how you have equipped your companies, your agents, with that.
So I think that's the most important focus right now, because what some agents I don't think have fully comprehended, this is not like inside baseball. Like CNN, CNBC, ABC, everyone has very real opinions, and unfortunately, I think a lot of them are misinformation to work as clickbait because, you know, what bleed leads. And so there's, you know, headlines that aren't full truths or like half statements. And so if an agent is not prepared to fully articulate what's actually happening, I think they're going to be at a significant disadvantage. And so you need to be able to, you know, I still think it's your fiduciary responsibility to explain to a seller, you don't have to offer compensation, but you know, these are the forms to entice consumers, and you have the choice to offer compensation. The big shift is there is now a different optionality that we didn't have with the previous versions of real estate. And so the people who are the most educated and approach it from a consultation standpoint, I think are going to win. And I think it's, again, the messy middle will eventually get to a new normal, but like anecdotally, I can tell you that a consumer will call one of our agents and they say, you need to sign something before I can unlock the door. What they say is, let me call you right back. And they call a trusted, you know, person of influence, parent, friend, coworker, who bought a home 6 months ago. And they go, that's not the process. I didn't have to do that 6 months ago. And so there's this breakage that's happening. And what's going to happen in reality is that consumer is probably going to call 3 or 4 or 5 agents and have the exact same experience. But it's going to take a while for all of it to work through the system. So those are the biggest things that we're focused on, where it's like, let me empower with you as much collateral, education, talk tracks, so you feel confident enough. And one of the things I've been saying, the market going forward will be a skills-based, professional-based world. There is a legitimate, and again, both of our numbers are public, so I can tell you like with certainty that about 60% of both of our transactional history, if you go back 2022, 2023, is buy-sided. There is a disproportionate amount of agents who never cross over into listing agents. And not because you guys aren't good enough or aren't skilled enough, it's confidence-based and investment-based, right? NAR says the average listing to bring to market is at least $2,500. And so a lot of agents felt more comfortable being a buyer's agent and not making that cash investment and skills-based investment. But I stand by my opinion that we're all listing agents now going forward. And so all of those skill sets that some people have not honed are going to be what are going to be necessary to compete in the new market.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think there's the consumer. Look, I think as an agent, as a practitioner, you owe it to yourself to be well versed in how things work today, right? Because to Leo's point, the consumer you're calling, they may or may not have any idea. It's your job, it's your duty to ensure that you are clear on what that process is, to help educate them behind the why. I think reset your value proposition, that is a skill and that is a confidence thing. But the consumer is also looking for, and I think this is one way you build that, they want to trust the person they're working with, right? And I don't think that's new, and I think that's, because of the noise in the industry and out of the industry, right? We forget so often because we're mired in this and we read all of our own little headlines, we think everybody reads all of it and that everybody's really well versed. They're really not. What they're seeing out there as a consumer are some headlines or some sound bites, and it's not clear. Like, I'll tell you, my parents have been looking for a home, and my mom called me and she's like, so what do I have to do now? And I spent like an hour explaining this to my mother, and she was like, okay. So the next day she calls me, she's like, I think we're gonna go look at a house. I'm like, did you sign paperwork? She's like, well, yeah, but I don't really understand why. I'm like, we literally just had this conversation for an hour, and you also sat with your agent who explained it. And this is, look, she's my mom, she's not, 25, so it takes like some time, but it was like, you realize how important the ability to accurately and thoroughly explain it and understand that your consumer's coming with a completely different lens. Importantly also is when you're dealing with a consumer, and I cannot stress enough, if you're sitting on one side of a table from a consumer who does know what's going on and is super well versed, and you are not going to get that business. You have killed the trust that consumer has in you, and you will never win that back. And there is a halo, like a negative halo effect around that, right? Because they're going to tell their friend and they're going to tell whomever. And so I think it's really important. They're looking for, besides this guide, this trusted advisor that you are and are on so many of the business, all of your business dealings, they are looking for efficiency. They are looking for integration. They are looking for things to be simple. And I've said this for years. Think about how you consume everything else you consume in your life, right? And by the way, signing a document with somebody who's providing a valuable service of you to agree to those terms up front and what the compensation is, that's pretty normal in like everything else we do, right? So think about that for a minute, right? It's you don't sign with your attorney without understanding what their compensation is and what your commitment to each other to deliver that service is. I think from the technology side, they're going to be looking to have this transaction be as easy or easier than a lot of the other things they do. We are a long way from that. Because of just the complexity of it, but they don't do this all the time. I mean, it used to be one every 7 years. Now it's maybe 10, maybe 3 houses in their entire lifetime. And, we talk a lot about what the first-time home buyer needs in this process. I will tell you, for my 80-something-year-old parents who had bought 10 or 11 homes before, hadn't bought one in 38 years, they are essentially a first-time home buyer, right? Not on paper, but, so I just think we have to really remember to take ourselves out of our own lens and put ourselves in the lens of the person who we are trying to earn the business from and what they need to trust us to guide them on that journey.
I think some of the talk around technology really is, let's talk about data, right? We have so much data now, and with that, it goes back to the consumer expectations too. They want a personalized experience. They want the reach out to be personalized. They want the, here's the kind of homes you really want. So how are you guys looking at data, leveraging data right now to really deliver a personalized experience?
So one of the things I've been harping on is language and communication and scripting, and it's not answering the direct question, but there is a mismatch in data with expectations. So NIR tells us that the average buyer agent length of investment in time is 80 to 100 hours over like a 4-month period. There was a recent survey done of recent closed buy sides. Do you guys have any idea what the average consumer thinks it takes us to render that service? 15 hours. So there's a massive disconnect between what the consumer thinks we do and what we actually do. And it goes back to what Sue says, where we live in this echo chamber where we think what we do is normal, right? Her stats are spot on. It used to be 7 years, it's about 10 years. It happens 3 times as a homeowner, 3 times as a tenant. So just assume they don't know what we're doing. And it goes back to, again, let's be transparent about how buyer agency worked in most states, because there are exceptions. If North Carolina or Washington, you don't need to raise your hand, I know. But what used to happen is you bumped into someone, and in somewhat of a casual way, you opened some doors for them, and eventually you kind of became their agent. And the relationship was consummated either with a closing or someone ghosting somebody else. And so now there is a start and an end date, and there's a communication and an expectation. And now that you're going to have to say, this is what I earn, you have to be able to articulate it. And even simple things like, and this should be in your buyer presentation, so write it down, is, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I'm super excited you're fully qualified, and we're going to start this very fun journey. There is about a 90+% chance that the house we ultimately buy, you are going to find on a portal, and you're going to send it to me. And that is how it will work. And where I deliver the vast majority of the value in this transaction will be from executing the purchase contract to getting through you the negotiation, through the inspections, and fulfilling the transaction. Finding the property and unlocking the door is about this much of the value I bring to the transaction, right? So it's being able to articulate and being able to explain. And one of the things I'm harping on my agents is every one of you needs to be calling probably 24 months past of buyers and asking them, what about the services I render? Because, by the way, statistically, like 79% of your past customers were actually satisfied customers. So you need to call them and go, what about the services I rendered blew your mind? And then actually incorporate their answers into your buyer presentation. And oh, by the way, if they had a phenomenal experience, I would ask them as courteously as possible to go to Google and actually create reviews around the buy-side transaction. Right, and we now all need to memorize new metrics, going back to data, that for you, masterful listing agents all know. Days on market, list to sell price ratio, what processes make you special. Do you know that statistically in CRMLS and Bright MLS, 55% of transactions in the last 6 months have had seller concessions? So statistically, about 60% of you guys actually negotiate buyer concessions. How much more powerful is it during a buyer presentation if you can say, over the last 24 months, on average, I'm able to negotiate a 4% concession and a 3% discount off list to my past 17 customers. In multiple contract situations, I win X% of the time, right? You need to be able to, because by the way, if I just told you that statistically I get a 4% discount and 3% concessions, and I ask for a fee, is that much easier once I've articulated my value? So I'm obsessed with data on your conversation and your storytelling ability to edify your value.
Yeah, listen.
Yeah.
He's never very passionate, is he, Leo? You're just like, no passion comes out of you, like ever. But, look, I think data can be used in a lot of different ways. And I think you're exactly right. You have to now think about what stats you need to present on how well you do your business, what the time on market is, all of that stuff in a different way, right? I think that's really important to support the value and to support the compensation for which you are, earning through that valued service that you provide. So I think that's really important. We use data in a lot of different ways in the company, whether it's, just looking at all the financial data, looking at the metrics, thinking about how that fuels integration, where we're, seeing, we look at data from pretty much everybody does, right? I mean, I think everybody, you can't run your business, and that's what I would probably say most about data, and all of you run businesses every single day. Data wins the game. It helps you make decisions better. We are by nature an instinct-led people in this business, right? We lead with our gut. It's often right. But I like having the data to back up my gut, right? And I think when you are dealing with an emotional transaction, it's easy to lose sight of facts if you don't have the data to back it up. And I say that not just on the transaction level with a consumer, but if you're making a decision on where to invest your marketing dollars, if you're making a decision on how much to spend for X, Y, or Z lead generation, if you're not using data to track the ROI on those types of things, on your investments, on your expenses, you really need to, right? Because that is how you are going to make the right choices on where to pivot your business. What is the data telling you about what the demographics are in your marketplace? Who's buying, who's selling, where are they coming from? All of these things we know, but that's data. And how you consume that and then make your business decisions from it is what's really most important.
You know, I don't think you can overstate the importance of leading with what their objection might be, right? It's very, very common sales, but maybe we don't understand that that's the argument that they've heard. So I was at the trial. I covered the trial. I heard the closing arguments from he who shall not be named. We won't say his name. The plaintiff's attorney. And I think that was one of his main things was like, well, basically what are they doing? You find your stuff on Zillow. You don't need this agent. And so even though we all know that, your buyer does not know that. They might think it's 15 hours. It's less than that because I found the house, right? So I feel like leading with that, making sure that you're in control of that conversation has got to be one of the most important things.
I think it cannot be understated. Like, I'm just going to double down on that. I think Leo probably would too. Do not assume that they know everything you do, right? I mean, I think
assume they don't.
Yeah, I mean, it irks me to no end to hear like, well, I mean, you're just a door opener. You just, like, oh my gosh, And I think now what I do think has happened over time because of technology is where the agent is most valuable in the transaction has shifted. And I think that's what people have latched onto, right? Like, oh, well, you find the house on Zillow, and then, and first of all, how many people buy the first house? Like, it just doesn't happen that way, especially in a market where you're inventory constrained and you're losing that house. And you got to, like, think about the time, you as an agent have sold one consumer 10 houses because you keep losing them along the way, right? Like, you have to get comfortable and confident in that because they don't know and they don't understand what happens. The inspection, this. I bought a house last year and I was sitting in the car with my husband. He was on the phone with the inspector. I was on the phone with the realtor and we were talking about stuff and we hung up the phone. He looked at me, he goes, "Can you not figure out a way to simplify this?" And I was like, "What?" He's like, "No, you. Like, I feel like you should fix this." I'm like, "We're trying, It's not easy, but, I'm married to the man and he didn't quite understand the complexity of it. So just do yourselves that favor. I'm sorry, it feels very preachy, but it just hurts me when it's so not clear to folks and we're afraid to be like bullish about what we do.
No, I think it's perfect that you've talked about your husband and your parents. It's like if anyone should know, like they would know, right?
You would think.
And yet.
It's one more thing he doesn't listen to me about. It's fine. The list is long.
Okay, last question as we look to the future. I want to hear your boldest predictions. Let's talk about 2025. I want to hear your boldest prediction about what the market's going to look like. You can talk about maybe the macro facts, the way that a new model that might be changed. What's going to be different? What are you looking forward to?
So I mean, I spoke to CNN yesterday about it, and I'm talking to CNBC on Monday. Like the nerdy interest rate stuff is like we should get a Fed cut, which should give us about a 10% bump in units for the year. So if we've been 3.94 million resales with 600,000 or 700,000 new builds, we could get up to 4.4, which again, being a finite game in a transaction unit economics business will be a reprieve because like also just acknowledging the last 2 years have been the worst 2 years in the last 30 years. The last time we had this few transactions was 0809, right? So even though like restaurants are full and the economy feels like it's humming, you guys have been in a recession of transactions. And so any reprieve to that will make all of our lives better. But my prediction is that it's going to be different and it's going to be messy. So I fully believe that in the next 24 months, it will look dramatically different than it's looked. I can't predict which way. There's a lot of different topics up in the air, from cooperation and clear policy. I was quite loud about my opinions about it this week, and we don't have enough time for me to go on that rant. But just know that keep the consumer as your North Star. And if you put them as the priority and serve them at the highest level through a very nervous, expensive, friction-full experience, they will refer you to their friends and family.
Look, I couldn't agree more. I think that it is going to be, I talked to the team about getting comfortable in the gray a little bit, right? Because things are going to change. We're not done changing. And the best way to navigate that is to just lean into it and to understand everything that's going on, to keep at the heart of it the consumer, because that is who we do this for. You are absolutely spot on. If you're leading with what's in the best interest for them, you as an agent, as a service provider, will be fine, and you will figure it out, and you will get it done, and you will do it well. I think that there is going to be, I'm sure there will be new models that emerge. They always do. I think that we're going to have fewer agents. I've said that before. I do. And I think that those of you that are embracing and learning and leaning in and participating in the industry are going to prosper. And you know, as the business comes back, I think interest rates will unlock some inventory, but I think the demand is still so dramatic that you know, we're still going to see that pace pick up, which will be great. But I do think that we're not done changing. I don't think that's a bad thing, because we have to realize that we're going to change, and you just have to embrace it and not hide from it.
Those are bold predictions. I appreciate both of you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.